Good day everyone, we are Group 1. Today we will talk about the Corporation Code of the Philippines. So this is the formal declaration that the revised Corporation Code is now a law. And it was passed by the Philippine Congress to replace the old Corporation Code of 1980. So for the Title 1, General Provision, Section 1, this section simply gives the law its official name. It tells us that this is the updated version of the Corporation Code. Section 2. This section defines what corporation is. A corporation is not a person, but is treated like anyone under the law. It has its own legal identity, separate from its owner. It can own a property, enter into contract, sue and continue to exist even if it is shareholder change. Here are the key features of Section 2. First is artificial being. It is created by the law, not born naturally. Next is the right and succession. It continues to exist even if the owners change. Next is the legal powers, which is it can act like a person in a business. Like for example, Jollibee is a corporation. Even if its original founders retire, the company still operates and expands because it has a legal identity. Next is non-stock corporation. These do not issue shares and are usually formed for non-profit purposes like charity, education, and religion. For example, a clothing brand with investors who own share a stock corporation. A foundation that provides free school supplies is a non-stock corporation.
3. Section 3 classes of corporations. Corporations may be classified as either stock or non-stock. Stock corporations have capital stock divided into shares and many distribute profit to shareholders. Non-stock corporations do not issue shares and are typically organized for non-profit purposes.
So now let's proceed to Section 4. Some corporations are created by a law passed by the Congress that is are called corporation with special charter. They follow their own rules, and if their charter doesn't cover something, the revised corporation codes will be applied. Like for example, the Development Bank of the Philippines or DBP was created by a special law, so it follows its own rules, but if those rules don't mention how to handle treasury shares, the revised code will be applied. So now let's go to Section 5. So Section 5 introduced the people involved in forming and owning a corporation. The first one is corporators, all people who make up a corporation. The next is incorporators, the original people who signed the articles of incorporation. The next is stockholders, owners of shares in a stock corporation. The last is members, participant in a non-stock corporation. Like for example, if A and B start a review center and sign the incorporation papers, you are the incorporators. If someone later buys shares in your company, they become a stockholder. So now let's proceed to Section 6. This section explains the different types of shares a corporation can issue. Each shares must be described clearly in the articles of incorporation, including its right, privileges, restriction, and par value. Here are the type of shares. The first one is common shares, regular shares with voting rights and dividends. The next is preferred shares, which is a priority in dividends and liquidation. The next is in voting shares, allow the holder to vote in decision. Next is non-voting shares, which is cannot vote in regular matters but can vote on major change. Next is redeemable shares, can be bought by the company under agreed items. And the last one is the no fair value shares, which is no fixed value but must be sold for at least 5 pesos. So for the example, A owns preferred share in a tech company. Shares receive dividends before common shareholders. B owns non-voting shares, but she still gets to vote when the company plans to merge with another business. So now let's proceed to Section 7. Founder shares can give an example rights such as voting for directors. However, these rights are limited to 5 years from the date of incorporation. They must also follow the national law like the Anti-Dumping Law and the Foreign Investment Act. Like for example, the founder of a startup may have the exclusive right to vote for the board of directors for the first 5 years. After that, all shareholders must be treated equally. So for the last section from our report, Section 8, redeemable shares are shares that the corporation can repurchase from the shareholders after a certain time or under specific conditions. This condition must be written in the articles of incorporation and the stock certificates, so the company can redeem these shares even without retained earnings. So for example, A invests in a company and receives redeemable shares after 3 years. So the company buys back his shares at the agreed prices as stated in their agreement.
Treasury shares are shares that were once issued and fully paid but later reacquired by the corporation through purchase, redemption, donation, or other lawful means. These shares no longer have voting or dividend rights while held by the corporation. They may be resold for a reasonable price set by the board of directors. For example, Orion Corporation issued 600 shares of common stock at 100 pesos per share, fully paid by the stockholders. Later, the corporation repurchases the same 600 shares from the stockholders at 150 pesos per share. These reacquired shares become treasury shares. The corporation may then resell these treasury shares to prospective or existing stockholders for 200 pesos. Section 10, Number and Qualifications of Incorporators. A corporation may be formed by one or more persons or entities, but not more than 15. Licensed professionals and professional partnerships cannot form a corporation to practice their profession unless allowed by special law. Natural person incorporators must be of a legal age and must subscribe to at least one share. For example, Marcus, a licensed engineer, and Talia, a certified public accountant, want to form a corporation to offer engineering and accounting services. However, licensed professionals are not allowed to form a corporation for the practice of their profession unless a special law authorizes it. Liam, a business owner, may still join them in organizing a corporation. If they proceed, each incorporator must own or subscribe to at least one share of the capital stock. If Liam eventually becomes a sole stockholder, the entity would be considered a one-person corporation or OPC under the code. Corporate team. A corporation has perpetual existence unless its article states otherwise. Older corporations automatically become perpetual unless the stockholders decide differently. The corporate team may be extended or shortened through amendments subject to conditions. A corporation whose term has expired may apply for revival, restoring its rights and obligations. Financial institutions may review only with approval from their regulating agencies. For example, Horizon Enterprises, incorporated in 1990, initially chose a fixed corporate term of 30 years but later extended it for another 20 years. Meanwhile, Summit Technologies' corporate term had already expired, prompting the company to apply revival to regain its former rights and obligations. In both situations, approval from the Commission was required for the corporations to proceed with their respective actions. Section 12, Minimum Capital Stocks Not Required of Stock Corporations. Stock corporations are generally not required to have a minimum capital stock unless a special law specifically requires it for a certain types of businesses. For example, Novatech Corporation, a stock corporation in the technology industry, benefits from the flexibility granted under Section 12 of the Corporation Code because there is no minimum capital stock requirement. Novatech can allocate its resources more efficiently to support its operations, invest in research and development, and pursue growth opportunities according to its business needs and market conditions.
Good day, everyone. So, now let's discuss the Section 13. Section 13 contests of incorporation. All corporations shall be filed with the Commission's Articles of Corporation in any of the official languages duly signed and acknowledged or authorized in form that may be allowed by the Commission. It contains substantially following matter except otherwise described by special law. And so the content is A. Name of the corporation. This section states the official name of the corporation. According to the Article of Incorporation, the name should end in INC, corporation, or OPC depending on the structure. The name is very important. It's the corporation legal identity because it will appear in all legal documents, contracts, and filings with the SEC. Under the revised corporation code, the articles of incorporation must include the corporation name because the name must be distinguishable from existing corporation to avoid confusion or rejection by the SEC. B. Purposes of the corporation. So here it discusses the purpose of the corporation according to the Articles of Incorporation. Next, the incorporators need to define the corporation's purposes, both primary, secondary, if there is more than one. Because this helps clarify what business or mission the corporation will pursue, whether it's commercial, charitable, or otherwise. And the RCC requires that the article specify the specific purpose or purposes of the corporation. If there are multiple purposes, the articles should clearly mark which is primary and which are secondary. And for non-stock corporation, the purpose cannot contradict their non-stock nature. Example, they cannot include purely profit-driven business if it undermines their non-stock character. C. Principal office. This section identifies where the main office of the corporation will be located. It must be in Philippines address. This is not just a mailing address. It's the legal domicile for corporate governance and regulatory purposes. Because the RCC requires that the article of incorporation include the place of the principal office, which must be within the Philippines. And also, this ensures the SEC and other government bodies know where to send notice and where the corporation is officially based. The corporators indicate how long the corporation will exist. By default, they can choose perpetual existence or set a fixed terms in years. If no limit is specified, the corporation will be treated as having a perpetual lifespan. E. Incorporators. So this one, we will discuss names, nationalities, and residences, and what is the founding incorporators, their full names, nationalities, and where they live. These individuals or entities are the ones signing and founding the corporation. Because incorporators are defined in the law as those who originally formed the corporation and signed the articles. And according to SEC MC 16 2019, incorporators may be natural person, partnership, domestic corporation, associations, or even foreign corporation. And natural person incorporate must be of legal age. F. Number of directors or trustees. In this section, the incorporator set out how many directors for a stock corporation or trustees For non-stock corporation, number of directors cannot exceed 15. And the RCC requires that the articles specify the numbers of directors or trustees. For stock corporation, up to 15 directors. For non-stock, also typically not more than 15 trustees. G. First board. Names, nationalities, and residents. This part identifies the initial directors or trustees, those who will serve until the first regular election. So they will write down their names, nationalities, and addresses because they are the first board of the company. And because the RCC requires naming the person who will act as director or trustees until the first formal election under the bylaws. Because this ensures there is a valid initial board from day one. H. Authorized capital stock. Here, the incorporators define the authorized capital stock, how many pesos the corporation can issue, how many shares, and the par value per share. Also, they will list the initial subscribers or the incorporators, how many shares each is subscribing to. If some shares are no par value, there is a statement about that too. Under Section 13 of the RCC, for a stock corporation, the article must include authorized capital, number of share, par value, names and nationalities of subscribers, amount subscribed, amount paid, and a note on no par share, if applicable. Interestingly, under the revised code, there is no minimum capital stock required for a stock corporation unless special law requires it. This flexibility is a major reform. Stock corporations don't need to hit a fixed minimum capital just to incorporate. I. Contributions for non-stock corporation. So this one we will discuss for non-stock corporation. If the corporation is non-stock, this section will instead talk about the capital contribution of the initial members. So they will list who contribute, their names and nationalities, their addresses, and how much each contributed. Because the RCC requires that for non-stock corporation, the articles include the amount of capital, the names, nationalities, addresses of contributors, and the amount each contributed. This ensures transparency about who owns or supports the non-stock entity and in what capacity. J. Other provisions. Optional, convenient matter. So we will discuss this. We will discuss this more. This other matters clause is a flexible part. The incorporators can include any additional provisions that are legal and helpful. This might include arbitration agreements, specific governance rules, or other special arrangements, as long as they do not conflict with the law. Because the RCC already allows such other matters consistent with law and which the incorporators may deem necessary and convenient to be included in the article. In practice, companies sometimes add clauses about arbitration, preemptive rights, special classes of shares, or other governance details as long as they comply with statutory limits. That's all for Section 13. So now let's discuss the Section 14. So actually, I already discussed it in Section 13 because it has a similarity as Section 13 because all the contents in the Section 13 is here to the Section 14 because it's a part of the form for articles incorporators. Incorporators, unless the special law is prescribed, the articles of corporation of all domestic corporation. So now let's discuss how important the signatures in the form of articles of incorporation. So signature, incorporators, and treasurer. This is the final part is where all the incorporators signs and put their printed names acknowledging that they agreed to form the corporation. The treasurer also signs here confirming that the paid in capital for stock horse is properly handled or deposited. So, the articles must be duly signed and acknowledged or authenticated. The treasurer's signature is important, especially for his or her affidavit that found have been paid or deposited or required. Although the exact languages of the treasurer's affidavit may appear in the bylaws or other corporate documents. So now let's discuss the Section 15. Under Section 15 of the RCC, amendments generally requires a majority of the board and the vote or written assent of two-thirds of stockholders for stock corporation or two-thirds of members, trustees for non-articles submitted to the SEC must show the changes by underscoring the new or modified text and must be attested to the corporate secretary and majority of the board. Once filed, the amendment takes effect when approved by the SEC, or if the SEC doesn't act within 6 months for non-corporation fault, it may take effect from the date of filing. So now let's discuss the Section 16. Section 16 of the Revised Corporation Code, which discuss the grounds when the Securities and Exchange Commission or SEC may disapprove of the articles of incorporation or any amendment to it. In simple terms, this section tells us the reason why SEC can reject her documents when forming or changing a corporation. So let's go through each ground one by one. First, SEC may disapprove of the articles of incorporation if the document is not substantially in accordance with the required form. This means that if your articles of incorporation is incomplete, not following the standard format, or missing required details, the SEC can reject it. The article of incorporation has a legal form that must be followed. Missing information like corporate names, purpose, principal office, incorporators, capital structure, or signature can cause rejection. Even small but important errors, wrong format, non-compliant layout can lead to disapproval. Now let's discuss the B. Second, SEC may disapprove your articles if the purposes or purpose of the corporation is unconditional, illegal, immoral, or contrary to government rules and regulations. In other words, if the corporation plans to do something that is against the law, against moral standard, or violates government policies, will not be approved. So now let's discuss the example of unacceptable corporate purposes. First, a corporation formed that engage in illegal gambling. Second, activities promoting fraud, scams, or third, purposes that conflict with public moral. Fourth, purposes restricted by special laws. Example, firearms trading without authority. SEC ensures that corporations operate within Philippines laws and ethics. So now let's discuss the C. Third, SEC may disapprove of the articles of incorporation if the certification above the capital stocks subscribed or paid is false. This means that if the corporation lies about how much capital was actually put in or subscribed by the incorporators, SEC can reject it. So, incorporators must declare how much capital is subscribed and paid up. Giving fake amounts or mispresenting investments is fraud because SEC requires truthful financial documentation to ensure transparency and protection of the public. For example, of disapproval, declaring 1 million capital subscribed but incorporates only put 10,000. Using fake bank certificates or receipts. So now let's discuss the D. So the fourth, SEC may disapprove the articles of incorporation if the required percentage of Filipino ownership is not met, especially in industries where the Constitution or other laws requires Filipino control. This usually applies to business where foreign ownership is limited. So, certain industries must maintain 60% Filipino ownership such as mass media, 100% Filipino, public utilities, mining, educational institutions, land ownership, foreign cannot own land. If the corporation violates these nationality restrictions, SEC must reject the application. So here the law says the banks, insurance companies, trust companies, and other financial intermediaries cannot have their article of incorporation or amendments approved unless there is a favorable recommendation from the appropriate government agency. This ensures stricter regulation over companies dealing with public money. Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas or BSP. Banks, quasi-banks, pawn shops. Insurance commission, insurance companies. Housing agencies, pre-need companies. These extra steps prevent financial scams, protect consumers, and ensures the company is financially sound and compliant. In summary, Section 16 gives 4 major reasons why SEC can disapprove articles of incorporation. If the form is incorrect or incomplete, if the purpose is illegal or unconstitutional.
First is Section 17, Corporate Name. The SEC will not allow a corporate name that is not distinguishable from an existing or reserved name, or one that is protected or prohibited by the law. Differences in corporate identifiers, for example, is the corporation or incorporated, punctuation, spacing, articles, or similar minor variations do not make a name distinguishable. If a corporation uses a prohibited name, the SEC may order it to stop using that name, remove all signages and materials bearing it, and adopt a new name. Failure to comply can result in contempt, liability, or even revocation of the corporation's registration. And for the Section 18, registration and corporate existence. For this, an incorporators must first secure approval of their intended corporate name. After submitting compliant articles of incorporations and bylaws, the SEC issues the Certificate of Incorporation. A corporation begins to exist legally and acquires juridical personality only upon the issuance of this certificate. From that point, It operates as a body corporate for the period states in its articles, unless extended or dissolved. So the next one is Section 19, de facto corporations. This is a group that has made a good faith attempt to incorporate is treated as de facto corporation. Its corporate existence cannot be challenged in private suits. Only the Solicitor General may question its right to exercise corporate powers and only through a quo warranto proceeding. And for my last section, Section 20, Corporation by Stockholm. This is a person who acts as a corporation without authority and knowingly do so are liable as general partners for obligation incurred. And a sustainable corporation being sued may not claim lack of corporate personality as a defense, and those who deal with it as a corporation cannot later deny its existence to avoid their own obligation.
Section 21 explains what happens if a corporation is formed, but does not operate or become inactive for a long time. First, if a corporation is incorporated but does not start its business within 5 years, the law says that its certificate of incorporation is automatically revoked, meaning legally the corporation will no longer exist. Second, if a corporation already started business but later becomes inoperative for 5 consecutive years, the SEC may place it under delinquent status. When a corporation is delinquent, it is still existing but it is considered non-compliant. The SEC will give the corporation 2 years to resume operations and submit all requirements. If the corporation complies, the SEC will left the delinquent status. If the corporation complies, the SEC will left the delinquent status. But if the corporation complies, the SEC left the delinquent status. But if it still fails to operate or comply within 2 years, the certificate will be revoked and the corporation will legally end. Example, ABC Corporation was incorporated in 2020 but never started operation by 2026. Its certificate is automatically revoked. Another example, XYZ Corporation started business in 2018 but stopped operating from 2019 to 2024. And since that is 5 years of incorporation, SEC can place it under delinquent status and give 2 years to fix compliance. In short, Section 21 ensures that corporations actually operate and not just exist on paper. Section 22 explains the qualification and terms of directors and trustees. Directors in stock corporations are elected from stockholders and serve for 1 year. Trustees in non-stock corporations are elected from members and may serve up to 3 years. A director must own at least 1 share and the trustee must remain a member. Corporation with public interest must have at least 20%. Independent directors, meaning they have no business or personal relationship, that after the decision, independent directors must be elected properly and follow rules set by the SEC to ensure fair and transparent corporate governance. Example, ABC Corporation or Stock Corporation has 10 seats on the board. All directors must be stockholders and will serve for 1 year. Because the company is publicly listed, at least 20%, meaning 2 seats must be independent directors who have no business or personal ties to the company. If a director sells all his shares, he automatically loses his position. Section 23. The election of directors or trustee. This section explains how shareholders or members elect their leaders. A quorum, or majority of voting share or members, must be present either in person, by proxy, or even online, through remote communication or in absentia. In stock corporation, votings can be done regularly or through cumulative voting, meaning a shareholder can combine all votes for one candidate or distribute them among several non-stock corporation. On the other hand, allow only one vote per candidate. The candidate with the candidate with the highest number of votings are declared elected. If no election happens, the meeting is adjourned and Section 25 applies. For example, if Maria owns 100 shares and 5 directors are to be elected, she can give 100 votes to each directors or combine all 500 votes for one candidate. Overall, Section 23 ensures that corporate elections are fair, transparent, and inclusive for all qualified voters. Section 24, which focuses on corporate officers. After the election of directors, the board must be immediately organized and elect the key officers of the corporation. These are a president who must be a director, a treasurer who must be a resident, and a corporate secretary who must be both Filipino citizen and a resident of the Philippines. The bylaws may also require other officers, and if the corporation is vested with public interest, it must also elect a compliance officer. One person may hold two or more positions but cannot be both the president and the secretary, or the president and the treasurer unless otherwise allowed by the code. For example, after electing its directors, XYZ Corporation chose one as president, Maria as treasurer, and Anna as secretary. Because it's a public interest company, Pedro is also elected as compliance officer. These officers are responsible for managing the corporation and performing duties assigned by the bylaws or the board of directors.
Section 25 of the Corporation Code, which talks about how company must report changes in their officers and elections. This section says that every time a corporation has an election for its leaders, like directors, trustees, and officers, they must report the result to the government agency called the Commission, which refers to the Securities and Exchange Commission or SEC. They need to do this within 30 days after the election. The report must include the names of the new officers, their nationalities, their shareholding, how many shares they can own, and or if any, and their home address. If no election was held, the company fails to hold an election, it must still report to the SEC within 30 days after the scheduled elections date. They must explain why the election did not happen and must set the new date for it. The new election date must be no later than 60 days from the original schedule. If the company still does not set or hold an election, the SEC can step in. Upon request of any member or stockholders, the SEC can order that an election be held and even assign someone to lead or supervise the election. If an officer leaves office, if one of the officers dies, resign or stop serving for any reasons, the company must report it in the writing to the SEC within 7 days after knowing about it. So let's example. Let's say a company Sunrise Corporation hold an election on March 1. So by March 31, their secretary must submit a report to the SEC with the list of new directors and officers. If they were not able to hold the election because of a typhoon, the secretary must report that to the SEC by March 31 too, and say that the new election will be on April 20. If April 20 passes and still no election happen, then one of the company members can ask the SEC to order an election. If the company's treasurer suddenly resigns, the secretary must report that to the SEC within 7 days after finding out. Section 26 of the Corporation talks about disqualification of directors, trustees, or officers. This means some people cannot be chosen as company leaders if they have done something in the past 5 years. A person is disqualified if they were convicted of a serious crime that has a punishment of more than 6 years in jail, found guilty of breaking business law like the Corporation Code of the Securities and Exchange Code, caught doing fraud, or dishonest acts by any government agency, or found guilty by a foreign court for similar violations. The law also allows the Securities and Exchange Commission to add more rules to make sure a company leaders are honest and responsible. Example, if Mr. De La Cruz were found guilty of stealing company money and sentenced for 7 years in prison, he cannot be a director or officer for 5 years. After that, even if someone did some crime in another country, they are still not allowed to lead a company in the Philippines. These rules help make sure that the company honest and responsible people can manage a corporation. Section 27. A removal of directors or trustees. This rules explains how a company can remove its directors or trustees, the people who help run and make decisions for the corporation. It tells who can vote, how many voters needed, and how the meeting should be conducted to make the removal official. How a director or trustee can be removed. A director or trustee can be removed if 2/3 of the stockholders or members agree to remove that person. This can happen in a regular meeting or a special meeting called specifically for removal. Everyone must be notified in advance that the meeting will be included a proposal to remove someone. Call a special meeting. A special meeting can be called if the company presidents or if the majority of the stockholders of the members demand in writing. If the secretary refuses to call the meeting, the stockholder themselves can send the notice and organize it. This makes sure that leaders cannot hide or block meeting that the members want. With or without cause. A director can be removed with cause or without cause. With cause means there is a clear reason like dishonesty or neglect of duties. Without cause means stockholders simply decide to replace that person. However, removal with cause cannot be used to take away the rights of minority stockholders, meaning small investors must still have fair representation on the board. The role of the Commission. The Securities and Exchange Commission can also remove a director or trustee if that person was disqualified but was still elected, or the disqualification was discovered after the election. The SEC can do this on its own, called motu proprio, or if someone files a verified complaint and the other board members knew that the person was disqualified but still allowed them to stay, they may also be punished. Let's say a company has 5 directors. One of them is Mr. Cruz, was caught using a company fund for personal use. During meeting, 2/3 of the stockholders voted to remove the director. The company informed everyone beforehand about the meeting. Even if Mr. Cruz refused to step down, the decision is valid because it's followed the Section 27 if the SEC later learned. Since that Mr. Cruz was already disqualified even before the election, it can also order his official removed. Section 28. Vacancies in the Office of Director, Trustees, and Emergency Board. Section 28 explains what a corporation must do when a seat becomes empty in the Board of Directors or Trustee, meaning when one of them leaves office because of death, resignation, removal, or other reasons. Here's what the law says in simpler terms. If a director or trustee leaves before their terms end, not because of removal or term expiration, the remaining director can choose a replacement if they still have enough members to make a quorum, the minimum number needed to make valid decision. But if they no longer have enough members to form a quorum, the stockholders or members hold a regular or special meeting to elect a new director or trustee. Second, if the vacancy is due to the end of a director's term, a new election must be held no later than the day that term ends. And third, if the vacancy caused by removal, the election cannot be held on the same day the director was removed. But this must be clearly stated the meeting notice by ends. Fourth, for all the cases, the election to replace the vacant position must happen within 45 days from the time the position become empty. The person who fills the spot is called a replacement, director or trustee, and they will only serve the remaining time of the person they replace. Emergency board. Sometimes, a corporation may face an emergency. For example, a big problem that needs immediate action, but there are not enough directors left to form a quorum. In this case, the remaining directors can temporarily appoint officers to the corporation to act as emergency directors or trustee. However, the emergency director can only act on matters related to the emergency, will serve temporarily until the emergency is over, or until a proper replacement is elected. And the corporation must inform the commission within 3 days that an emergency board be created explaining why it was needed. Example, let's say Sunrise Corporation has 7 directors. 2 of them resigned and 1 dies. Suddenly, leaving only 4 directors. They still have enough to form a quorum. So, they can vote among themselves to appoint replacement until the next regular election. But, later, 2 or more directors also resign. Now, only 2 are left, not enough to form a quorum. If an important business decision needs to be made immediately, like preventing the company from losing a big contract, those 2 directors can temporarily appoint officers like the company's treasurer or vice president to form an emergency board. Once the situation is under control or a proper election is held, the emergency board's authorized ends.
Directors and trustees usually do not receive regular compensation because they are considered owners of the corporation and already benefit from the company's profit. Their main duty is to act in the best interest of the corporation, not to earn extra money from their position. Under this Section 29 of the Revised Corporation Code, they may receive per diems, which is a small or reasonable allowance for attending board meetings. If the corporation wants to give them additional pay, the amount must be decided by the directors themselves but by the stockholders during a regular or special meeting. This prevents conflict of interest since the directors might give themselves too much money if they vote for their own pay. The law also set limits total yearly compensation of all directors must not exceed 10% of the net income before the tax from the previous year. And the corporation must report director compensation to stockholders and the commission if it's a public interest corporation. Example, if a corporation earned 10 million net income before tax last year, the total compensation allowed for all directors this year cannot exceed 1 million. If directors try to approve 2 million for themselves, this is not valid because it is exceed the legal limit and they cannot vote in their own pay. Section 30. Directors, trustees, and officers are normally not personally responsible for the corporation obligation because the corporation is considered a separate legal entity. However, Section 30 explains that they may become personally liable if they commit serious wrongdoing. One case is when a director knowingly approves or allows illegal acts such as approving a business that clearly violates the law. Another case is a gross negligence or bad faith, which means acting with dishonesty, intentional harm, or a reckless behavior that causes damage to the corporation. But judgmental alone is not enough. The negligence has to be extreme. They are also liable when there is a conflict of interest, such as when directors receive bribes or personal benefits in exchange of approving a contract. When this happens, the guilty directors must return the money or the profit to the corporation. Importantly, only the directors who committed the wrongful profit or liable in sense director and not to punish. Example, if the band approves selling product that they know is banned by law and the director X voted yet despite knowing it was illegal, director X can be personally liable for any damage or permitting caused by the decision. Directors who vote no or did not know about the illegality. Section 31 discusses self-dealing contracts, which are contracts between the corporation and the director's officer or their spouse or relative up to the fourth civil degree. These contracts are usually voidable, meaning the corporation can cancel them if the directors gains personal benefit from the transaction. However, the contracts can still be valid if the certain conditions are met. The interest director is not needed to the form of a quorum. Their vote is not required for approval. The contract is fair and the reasonable and the public interest corporation at least 2/3 of the board, including the majority of the independent directors, approve it. If the contract involves an officer, the board must authorize it. Even if the some conditions are not met, the contract may still valid if a last 2/3 of the stockholders approve it. It has a long or it remains fair and reasonable. For example, Director A owns a printing shop and the corporation wants to buy printed materials from that shop. If Director A leaves the room during voting and the remaining directors approve the deal because the price is fair and cheaper, then competitors and the contract becomes valid because the directors did not influence the decision and the deal is reasonable. Section 32 covers interlocking election, which refers to a director who sit on the boards of the two corporations and enter into contract with each other. Contracts between such as corporations are generally valid if they are fair and reasonable. But there is an important exception. One, if the director has a substantial interest, defined as owning more than 20% of the shares in a corporation and the only small interest in one another, then the rule of the self-dealing contracts under Section 31 apply. For example, if a directors own 25% in Corporation A but only 15% in Corporation B, the contract became voidable in Corporation B. If the director has substantial interest in both corporation or small interest in both, the contract is valid. Example, suppose Director B owns 30% of a Corporation A but only 5% of a Corporation B. If A wants to supply products to B, the contract must follow Section 31 rules like fairness and non-participation of the interest director, because Director B has a large interest in A but not in a B. However, if the Director B owns 25% in the both corporation, the contract is automatic
on the ethical responsibility and loyalty of a director toward the corporation. It says that if a director uses his position to gain a business opportunity that should rightfully belong to the corporation, he must be considered disloyal and must return all the profits he gained from it. The only time he is allowed to keep those profits is if 2/3 of the stockholders agree or vote to let him keep it. Imagine that you are a director of a food manufacturing company. You learn about a big opportunity. A supermarket wants to partner with your company to supply snacks. But instead of letting your company take the deal, you secretly open your own small business and sign the deal yourself. That is disloyalty. Because as a director, your duty is to act in the best interest of the corporation, not for your personal gain. This law requires you to refund all the profits you made back to the corporation because those profits should have been earned by the company at the first place. This provision promotes corporate integrity and fairness. Director must always place the corporation's interests above their own. This section allows the board of directors to form an executive committee to help manage the corporation more efficiently. The committee must have at least 3 directors that can handle specific matters that the board assigns to them. However, not everything can be delegated. Major corporate actions like amending bylaws, approving mergers, or declaring dividends must still be approved by the full board or stockholders. For example, in a big corporation like a national retail chain, the board of directors may be too busy to meet quickly to approve things like branch renovations, small loans, or supplier contracts. But if the company plans to merge with another business or change by its laws, that's too important. It must be decided by the full board and the stockholders. This section defines the powers that every corporation has by law. It's like giving a corporation its legal personality, the same way a person can own, buy, and sell property. A corporation can do those things too. This code has the power and capacity to sue and to be sued in its corporate name, to have perpetual existence unless the certificate of incorporation provides otherwise, to adopt and use a corporate seal, to amend its articles of incorporation in accordance with the provision of this code, to adopt by laws not contrary to law, morals, and public policy, and to amend or repeal the same in accordance with this code. In case of stock corporation, to issue or sell stocks to subscribers and to sell treasury stocks in accordance with the provision of this code, and to admit members to the corporation if it be a non-stock corporation. To purchase, receive, take or grant, hold, convey, sell, lease, pledge, mortgage, and otherwise deal with such real and personal property, including securities and bonds of other corporation, as the transaction of the lawful business of the corporation may reasonably and necessarily require subject to the limitation prescribed by law and the Constitution. To enter into a partnership, joint venture, merger, consolidation, or any other commercial agreement with natural or juridical person. Reasonable donations including those for the public welfare or for hospital, charitable, cultural, scientific, civic, or similar purposes, provided that no foreign corporation shall give donation in aid of any political party or candidate or for purposes of partisan political activity. To establish pension, retirement, and other plans for the benefit of its directors, trustees, officers, and employees, and to exercise such other power as may essential or necessary to carry out its purpose or purposes as stated in the articles of the corporation. This section gives corporations the flexibility to extend or shorten their lifespan. When a corporation is created, its term or duration is usually stated in its articles of incorporation. Some have a fixed number of years, while others have perpetual existence. But if the corporation wants to continue operating beyond its original term, or close earlier than planned, it can do so with proper approval. The board of directors must first approve the change, then 2/3 of the stockholders must also approve it in a meeting. For example, let's say a company was incorporated for 25 years, but still profitable and growing. Before the 25 years end, it can apply to extend its corporate term. On the other hand, if the company is no longer active or its owners want to retire early, they can shorten the term and dissolve the corporation sooner. This section gives corporations the power to adjust their lifespan depending on their business needs.
Section 37, Power to increase or decrease capital stock. Explain the process a corporation must follow when it wants to change its capital structure, such as increasing or decreasing capital stock, or when it wants to incur or increase bond long-term secured loans. These actions require approval from both the board of directors and 2/3 of all outstanding stockholders. Proper notice must be given and the corporation must file a certificate with the SEC showing that all legal requirements were followed. The SEC will only approve an increase in capital if at least 25% is subscribed and 25% of the subscription is paid. For example, ABC Corporation plans to open a new manufacturing facility, so it needs more funds. The board proposes increasing the capital stock from 20 million to 30 million. After sending notices, the stockholders meet and more. For example, ABC Corporation plans to open a new manufacturing facilities, so it needs more funds. The board processes increasing the capital stock from 20 million to 30 million. After sending notices, the stockholders meet and more than two-thirds approve the increase. Investors subscribe to at least 25% of the increase, or 2.5 billion, and pay at least 25% of that amount, 625,000. ABS Corporation then submits the required certificate to the SEC, which approved the increase. The company can now legally raise additional capital for expansion.
Section 38, the preemptive right. Section 38 gives the stockholders what is called the preemptive right, the right to buy new shares of the corporation before they are offered to others, allowing them to maintain their proportionate ownership. The right applies unless the articles of corporations or an amendment remove it. However, stockholders do not have the right when shares are issued for public offerings. A compliance with the laws requiring border ownership, or when shares are issued in exchange for property or debt previously owned by the corporation. For example, for instances, if DEF Corporation issues new shares to raise additional capital, existing stockholders are given the first chance to buy these shares so they can keep their ownership percentage. If a stockholder owns 10% of the company, they may buy enough of the new shares to remain at 10%. However, if DEF Corporation issues shares as payment for land needed for its operations, stockholders do not have preemptive right over those shares because it is in exchange for property and allowed as an exceptions other. Section 39, sale or other disposition of asset. Explain the rules of corporation must follow when selling, leasing, exchanging, mortgage, pledging, or otherwise disposing of all other substantially of all its property and assets. This major transaction requires approval from the board of directors and at least two-thirds of outstanding stockholders. Notice must be given before the meeting, and the sale must be evaluated based on the corporation's latest financial statement to determine whether it involves all or substantially all assets. The section protects stockholders, especially dissenting ones, by giving them appraisal right and ensure that corporations cannot dispose of their major asset without proper approval. For example, GHI Corporation decided to sell almost all its machinery, vehicle, and equipment because it plans to shift to a new line of business. Since these assets make up nearly of all the company's property, the board cannot sell them on its own. The board passes a resolution and sends written notices to all stockholders calling for a meeting. During the meeting, more than two-thirds of the stockholders approve the sale based on the company's latest financial statement. A few stockholders disagree, so they exercise their appraisal rate. After approval, the corporation proceeds with the sale and uses the proceeds for its remaining business activities in accordance with the law.
So now let's proceed to sections 40 to 44. Sections 40 to 44 explain the powers and limits of a corporation in handling its shares and property. They cover how a corporation may buy back its own shares, invest in other businesses, declare dividends, and manage funds and property. These sections aim to ensure that all corporate actions are lawful, fair, and beneficial to both the company and its stockholders. Section 40 gives a corporation the power to acquire its own shares provided it has unrestricted retained earnings to cover the cost. This may be done for legitimate purposes such as eliminating fractional shares, collecting unpaid subscriptions from delinquent stockholders, or paying dissenting shareholders who choose to withdraw. For example, if a company issues stock dividends and a shareholder ends up with 0.5 of a share, the company may buy that half share to simplify ownership. Section 41 allows a corporation to invest its funds in another business or corporation. This requires approval from the majority of the board of directors and at least 2/3 of the stockholders. However, if the investment is necessary for achieving the corporation's main purpose, stockholder approval is not required. For instance, if a food manufacturing company invests in a farm to secure its ingredient supply, that investment supports its main business. Section 42 empowers the board of directors to declare dividends out of the corporation's unrestricted retained earnings. Dividends may be in the form of cash, property, or stock. However, a corporation cannot retain surplus profits beyond 100% of its paid-in capital unless it is justified by approved expansion projects, restrictions from creditors, or special circumstances that require financial reserves. Section 43 authorizes corporations to enter into management contracts with other corporations, meaning one company can manage another's operations. This must be approved by the boards of directors and a majority of the stockholders of both corporations. If there are common owners or directors between them, the approval of 2/3 of the stockholders of the managed company is required. A management contract cannot last longer than 5 years. Finally, Section 44 defines ultra-vires acts, which are acts performed by a corporation beyond the owners granted by law or its articles or incorporation. These acts are invalid because they go beyond the corporation's authorized purpose. For example, if a construction company starts operating a restaurant without changing its purpose in the articles, that would be considered an ultra-vires act. In conclusion, Sections 40 to 44 emphasize that corporations have significant powers, but this must always be exercised within legal boundaries and for legitimate purposes. These rules ensure that corporations act responsibly, protect their stockholders, and maintain fairness in their business